Vygotsky is presented mostly in a history of psychology. If you take the psychological textbooks or about the history of psychology, he is there. Because this is the fact, the theory was created almost 100 years ago. It might look like an outdated theory, which is old, which belongs to the history, and people who are interested in the history might be interested in that. But contemporary psychology is different. It goes far, far, far away, far, far, far beyond all these historical people, and therefore it has only historical interest. That's the point I want to discuss, and this is the point I want to make a counter-argument, if you like. The question is very simple. Is the cultural historical theory still alive? Or it was one of those existed in the history and we have to respect but not to use? So is it outdated or not? So from my point of view, Vygotsky's theory, cultural historical theory, is the fundamental for the whole psychology. It's one of the fundamental theories of psychological development. And it has a very specific subject matter. And the subject matter is the process of development, the development, genesis of higher psychological functions of the human being. And why I say it's a fundamental theory, because it really made a fundamental contribution to the whole psychological science of the 20th century and 21st century. And because it's a fundamental theory, so the contribution is also fundamental. But the point is that this contribution, being fundamental, is not still recognized and it's still not discovered. That's why I said Vygotsky theory remains undiscovered theory, unfortunately. And there is no way to rehabilitation. There is a way of reanimation, so to say. Our task is just to bring the theory as it is to the agenda and to see how fundamental the theory is and what is the place of the theory in the history of psychology. So one of the points which is important is that this theory suggests the deepest level, which is the same as the highest level of analysis of the process of development through culture and history. Why I say the deepest level of analysis? Because it reveals the dialectical character of the process of development of human beings. And the theory is somewhere between the dialectics as a method of analysis, philosophical methods, and practical application. That's why Vygotsky himself called it intermediary theory, which is the theory which applies dialectical understanding of development to the specific area of psychological development. This is the only one theory which consistently applies the dialectical method to understanding of the process of development of higher psychological functions. That's why it's an intermediary theory. This is the first uniqueness of the theory, is that this theory consciously, deliberately, and that was Vygotsky's task, to create a sort of intermediary theory which helps to apply the dialectical method of analysis of development into the specific field of psychology. And this makes this theory unique, because that was the task Vygotsky had, and it was the task he resolved, and this is the theory he has created. Now, Anthony, you see, you can open 100 textbooks with the description of Vygotsky theory. You will never find anything about this. My question is why? So even because of this, it should not be in the line of many other theories, because this is a distinguishing feature of this theory. it is not completely psychological. It's a dialectical psychological theory, so to say. And you see, this is a kind of evidence. It's not what I think. It's what I'm saying is just based on Vygotsky's own words. He said that we have to change the understanding of child development. That child development is a complex dialectical process, and we have to find the tools to analyze the development, the process of psychological development as a complex dialectical process. That was the task, and the theory is kind of answer to this task. On the other hand, point two is that what Vygotsky did in psychology is actually can be compared with what Darwin did, Charles Darwin did to biology. And what you see on the screen is the Linnean system of classification. It was a zoology, biology was based on the classification. But classification is the first stage of development of any scientific discipline. So all these species were classified belonging to species, genus, families, orders, class, and kingdoms. And everybody was happy with that theory. But then Darwin made something. But before we come into Darwin, I'm again asking Vygotsky. You see what Vygotsky says, that psychology is the science which is based on the description of different phenomena. And this is true, Anthony. Open every psychological textbook and you will see the chapters. Perception, thinking, memory, and classification. Types of perceptions, types of thinking, types of memory, and everything. It looks very linear. And Vygotsky said that this state of art should be overcome by introducing the idea of development, the same way as Darwin introduced the idea of biological evolution. The task for Vygotsky was not to explain psychology using biological evolution, but to introduce the idea of development, cultural, historical development of higher psychological functions. And therefore, I can compare his contribution to world psychology with the contribution of Darwin's theory into biology. The same. And look, it might be very simple. If you speak with any biologist, evolutionary biologist, you can ask a question: what are the three main processes of evolution? And Darwin's theory gives an answer that all evolution consists from three processes: anamorphosis, adaptation, and degradation. That's it. Of course, every process of these three processes is very complex, but this is a complete explanation. But if you ask, what are the two main processes in Vygotsky's theory, you will never have any answer. It's not written in the textbooks. It's not written in any books about Vygotsky. I can give you an answer. There are two processes. The first is vrastanie in Russian, which is the growing of the subject of the child into the culture. And the second is vrashivanie, which is growing in of higher psychological functions from outside inwards. These are two main processes which explain the process of cultural development from psychological point of view. You can compare a list on the left and list on the right. But again, you can ask several Vygotskians this question and you will have different answers. You cannot call yourself a Darwinian or biological or evolutionary biologist if you have no idea about three processes of evolution. Impossible. But you can call yourself Vygotskian scholar, having no idea about these two main processes, which the process of cultural development consists from. This is what I'm saying. Very interesting, right? And the last point I want to share is that when we speak about development, psychological development, This means that there are laws of development. If you want to build the theory of development, you have to discover the laws of development. And this is again what Vygotsky says. The laws that govern their course and fate. All these constitutes the subject matter of these investigations. This is Vygotsky's words. But if you ask the question, what are the laws of psychological development the cultural historical theory is based on? You can ask 10, 15, 20, 50 Vygotskians the same question, and you will never have the same answer. Some speak about only one law, somebody knows 3 laws, somebody knows 3.5, and so on and so on. But when you are speaking with any physician, physicist doing research in mechanics, if you ask, hey, what are the laws of Newtonian mechanics? These people might consider you as a stupid, saying, why are you asking this question? How can I do a physical research having no idea about this, right? And if you ask the physician to explain what does it mean, they will make it in 10 minutes, no problem. But when you ask, what are the laws of psychological development Vygotsky discovered in the cultural historical theory? You have different answers. And if you ask, what are the relations of these laws? It will be a question they, again, might think you are stupid, asking these questions which are beyond their knowledge. I want to help you. This is the list of laws of cultural historical theory is based on. There are 9 laws. And they all are in Vygotsky's published texts. And here there are the references. So people who are doing Vygotsky's studies for the last 50 years, they had no time to write one paper, just one paper, which presents all of these laws, at least in the form of the list. You cannot find even one paper or even one book which presents all these laws in a certain order. My question is, why? Is it possible to consider yourself as a Vygotskian scholar having no idea about this? I don't know. Okay. And the last point is that Vygotsky's methodology of research. This is very important because theory without method is like a knife without the handle. And from my point of view, Vygotsky's method of research helps us to formulate new type of research questions. From how and what research questions to why and what research questions. When we are doing observations, we can have a research question, for example, how private speech looks, or how thinking looks. You can make an observation and you can answer that question. It might look like this, like this, like this, like this. If you change the condition, it looks like this. When you're changing conditions, it looks like that. So all this is very important, but it doesn't give the answer to the question why it looks like this and this and this and this, and why it does not look like that and that and that and that. Vygotsky's theory is the theory which provides with the opportunities to answer the question why. I can compare this with the contribution of the Copernicus to astronomy, like a heliocentric or heliocentric model. That's what Vygotsky did in psychology, the same as Copernicus did in astronomy. I know, it's quite familiar for you, right? Yeah. So, what was the what is the best picture to explain Copernicus' revolution? I think this is the picture. Because if you look on the right, so the yellow is Sun, red is Mars, and blue is Earth. When the Earth is in the center, when the Sun moves around the Earth, that's okay. But the planet Mars has a very interesting trajectory, you see? Mm. And if you are looking, and when you're looking from the Earth, if you are absorbing from the Earth, if you are answering the question, how, you will never have an idea why Mars is moving such an interesting trajectory. Why the Sun moves this way and the Mars moves that way. And to be able to give the answer why, you have to change your focus. You have to go to the Sun and look from the Sun. And from the Sun, the trajectory of Mars and the trajectory of Earth will be identical. That was the contribution of Copernicus. And that was the same contribution Vygotsky did to psychology, because Vygotsky's method is the method which helps us to understand why this happens, what we can absorb, what is the reason of this happens. We are not only doing observations and patterns, we are trying to explain why this phenomena exists this way and why not that way. So this is the picture which gives an answer. So you see on the left, the sunrise, sunset. We can make an observation of sunrises. Okay, we can see the regularity, we can see the patterns of sun rising. And that's what people do. And this is what the empirical science does. The same way we can make lots of observations of sunsets, right? You can collect the data of different sunsets, you can make a patterns, and you can find the similarities between the different sunsets. But for you, in general, these two processes will be mutually opposite, because sunrise and sunset are opposite things. Mm-hmm. But if you change the way to Copernicus, you will understand that sunrise and the sunset is the same process. Mm. They are not two opposite processes, they are the same. So Vygotsky's method of research helps me as a researcher to find in things I observe, if they look differently, it might give me the answer. They look differently, but they are the same thing. Mm. And on the other hand, this research method helps me to understand if the things I observe are different, they might be the same things. Or if they look the same, they might be different by their origins, by their genesis. So you see, I compared this Darwin, Newton, and Copernicus. I think it's enough. And the last, does it need a rehabilitation? Yes, yes, yes. We need to speak about this when we speak to the mainstream psychologists. Unfortunately, Vygotskian scholars had no time and had no interest to present to the mainstream psychology Vygotsky in the full sense. And therefore, well, this is the task, I think. We first have to discover the complete Vygotsky, and then we have to present this to the community. Oh, it took a little bit more. I wanted just 15 minutes, but thank you for not interrupting me. You are fantastic as always.